The rain fell in a fine mist, cloaking the suburban street in a haze that blurred the yellow glow of porch lights. James Whitmore pulled his truck into the narrow driveway, the engine's low rumble fading as he cut it off. It had been 3 months since he'd seen his daughter, Emily. 3 months at a Special Forces training camp on the West Coast. No letters, no calls, just the grind of the mission and the promise of home. His rain-soaked backpack slapped against his shoulder as he reached for the spare key under the porch light. The door opened silently, but the air inside hit him like a stranger's house. Lavender and lemon, scents he'd never used. The living room glowed under new LED lights, the couch reupholstered, a candle burning steady on the dining table. Something was off, too clean, too still. If stories like this hit close to home, hit the like button and subscribe. There's more to come. Diane's voice called from the kitchen, surprised but not warm. I didn't think you'd be back today. She stepped out, wiping her hands on an apron, her smile brief, practiced. Diane, his wife of 2 years younger by a decade, had come into his life after his first wife's car crash left Emily motherless. They'd married fast. For Emily, for stability, or so James had told himself. Got early leave, he said, setting his backpack down. Thought I'd surprise you. Diane nodded, her eyes flicking away. Emily will be thrilled. Where is she? Asleep, Diane said, turning back to the kitchen. Played a lot today. Wore herself out. James didn't answer, his eyes scanning the room. No scattered toys, no tiny shoes by the door, no stuffed bear draped over the couch. Emily's traces were gone. He moved toward the stairs, his boots soft on the carpet, a soldier's habit of silence. The hallway was dark, Emily's door closed, no sound leaking out. Then it came, a scream, sharp and raw, tearing through the quiet. Daddy! James lunged, his hand on the doorknob. Locked. He stepped back, braced, and kicked hard, the door splintering open. Light spilled into the room, revealing Emily curled in the corner, tears streaking her face, a red mark glowing on her cheek like it was fresh. Diane stood 2 steps away, a pillow in her hands, her face caught between surprise and something else. James dropped to his knees beside Emily, his heart hammering. She flinched as he reached out, her eyes staring past him, blank but trembling. She was messing around, Diane said, her voice shaky but controlled. Slipped and fell. Screamed. I was just about to handle it. James didn't look at her, his hands gentle on Emily's shoulders, checking her neck, her wrists. An old bruise lingered under her hairline, her hands ice cold. You said she was asleep, he said, his voice low, steady, but edged with something dangerous. Diane stiffened. She was. At the time, James lifted Emily, her body limp, her head resting on his shoulder, a single tear soaking into his collar. He turned, seeing Ricky and Mrs. Susan at the top of the stairs, their faces pale, unreadable. What happened? Ricky asked, his voice too casual. All I heard was a scream. James didn't answer, just carried Emily downstairs, wrapping her in a throw blanket from the couch. He laid her on the sofa, her eyes half open, silent. What's going on here? He asked, his voice firm, a commander's tone cutting through the room's stillness. No one spoke. Diane's hands twisted in her apron. Susan sipped coffee. Ricky shrugged. The silence was louder than the scream. James walked to the kitchen, opening the fridge. No special milk for Emily's dairy allergy, no familiar snacks, no trace of her awl-shaped cup. He returned to the couch, sitting close to Emily, his voice soft. Talk to me, sweetheart. What happened? She shook her head, lips pressed tight, her eyes dull with a fear she couldn't name. James closed his eyes, his mind racing. When he opened them, he leaned closer. From now on, no one goes in your room but me. Understand? Emily nodded faintly, then whispered, Are you leaving again? His chest tightened a blade. No, he said, firm, final. I'm staying. I won't let anyone hurt you again. He stayed awake all night, Emily asleep against his arm, her breathing uneven but steady. The red mark on her cheek faded slightly, but the bruise on her wrist, greenish-purple, told a story she couldn't. James didn't sleep, his eyes fixed on her, his mind replaying the scream, the locked door, Diane's quick excuses. He thought of his first wife, Elena, her laugh, her warmth, gone in a crash that left him and Emily to rebuild alone. He thought Diane was a new start, a safe harbor. Now, he saw cracks. Susan's too perfect smile, Ricky's careless shrugs, the house too neat, too wrong. Emily stirred, whimpering in her sleep, and James's hand tightened on her shoulder. He'd made a promise, not just to come home, but to protect her. Whatever was happening here, he'd find it, and he'd end it. The morning light filtered through the suburban haze, casting soft shadows across the kitchen where James Whitmore stood, his hands steady but his mind racing. Emily was upstairs, still asleep, curled under the blanket he'd tucked around her. The red mark on her cheek had faded to a faint pink, but the bruise on her wrist lingered, a silent accusation. James poured a coffee, the mug warm in his calloused hands, but he didn't drink. He listened every creak of the floor, every clink of dishes, every muffled word from Diane in the next room. The house felt like a battlefield, quiet but charged, and he was a soldier again, watching for the enemy's next move. Something was wrong, and he was done waiting for it to show itself. Diane moved through the kitchen, her apron crisp, her hair pinned tight, slicing bread with a precision that felt performative. Ricky slouched at the table, his gray hoodie loose, feet propped on a chair, eating cereal like nothing had happened. Mrs. Susan sipped coffee, her smile small practiced, as if the scream last night was just a bad dream. "Want some coffee?" Diane asked, her voice light but strained, not meeting James's eyes. He shook his head, leaning against the doorframe. "Is Emily still asleep?" Ricky asked, mouth full, too casual. "She's tired," James said, his gaze fixed on Diane's hands, the knife pausing for a split second before cutting again. "That bruise on her cheek," James said, his voice low, steady. "What's that about?" Diane didn't flinch, just kept slicing. "She probably fell yesterday. You know how she's always running around. I told you." And the mark under her wrist, he pressed, his tone sharper now. Susan glanced up, her coffee cup still. "Old," Diane said, shrugging. "Or the housekeeper before she quit." James's jaw tightened, his eyes catching the way Diane's fingers gripped the knife, the way Susan's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The housekeeper quit 3 weeks ago," he said, his voice calm but cutting. Diane's hands stilled, just for a moment, then resumed. "Kids bruise easy," she said, her tone too even. James took Emily to press school that morning, the drive silent except for the hum of the engine. Emily clutched her worn stuffed bear, its fur faded, her eyes fixed out the window. The red brick school loomed ahead, moss creeping along its walls. Bethany, the teacher, stood at the door with her clipboard, her smile faltering when she saw James. "Good morning, Emily," she said, crouching down. Emily nodded, her gaze distant, and shuffled inside. James waited until the door closed, then turned to Bethany, his voice low, steady. "While I was away, did you notice anything different about Emily? Any changes?" Bethany adjusted her glasses, uneasy. "She's been quieter. Sits alone, draws a lot but won't show them, doesn't smile as much." James's eyes didn't waver. "Anything else? Bruises, marks, anything unusual?" Bethany paused, her gaze flicking to the classroom window. "I saw a scrape on her wrist once, a red mark on her neck." I asked, "But Diane said she's clumsy, always tripping. You believe that?" James asked, his voice sharper now. Bethany hesitated, then shook her head, just barely. "I don't know. I can't interfere in family matters." James nodded, pulling a card from his wallet, writing a number on the back. "If anything comes up, call me." No hesitation. He handed it to her, his grip firm, then turned and walked away, the weight of her words settling like stones. That afternoon, James stopped by the park, buying 2 ice cream cones, the air cold enough to keep them from melting. Emily sat beside him on a bench, staring at hers, not eating. "Tired, honey?" he asked, his voice soft. She shook her head, her eyes on her hands. "Did your stepmother hurt you?" he asked, gentle but direct. Emily hesitated, then shook her head, then nodded, her movements small, conflicted. James didn't push, just sat, letting the silence breathe. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Stepmom doesn't like me. Grandma said if I told you, you'd leave and never come back." James's chest tightened, his breath catching. "Who said that, Grandma? And stepmom?" Her eyes met his wide, scared. "I'm afraid you'll disappear." James set his cone down, pulling her into a hug. She didn't hug back, but she didn't pull away either, her small body tense but trusting. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low, steady. "No matter what anyone says, I'm not going anywhere. Even if you're mad, even if you don't want to talk, I'm here." She nodded, a small movement, her hands clutching the bear tighter. James's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. Diane's excuses, Susan's silence, the bruises, the fear in Emily's eyes. He'd trusted Diane to be a mother, Susan to be a guide, but now he saw cracks, lies dressed in smiles. He canceled his return to the unit that morning, emailing a request for a 7-day leave, no explanation given. He needed time, not to rest but to watch. Back home, James played the part, quiet, tired, nursing a fake headache. He stayed upstairs, door ajar, curtains drawn, listening. Around noon, he heard Emily's slippers shuffle toward the kitchen, then Diane's voice, low, sharp, dirtying the floor again. "How far are you trying to push me?" Silence, then Diane again, colder now. "You're lucky you get to eat, get clothes, live in this house. Your mother dying was the best thing that ever happened." James's heart thudded, his hand gripping the bed frame. He didn't move, not yet, but his ears caught every word, every pause. Emily's reply was a whisper. I'm sorry, I cleaned it. Shut up, Diane snapped. Cleaned what? You call this cleaning? Get a rag. On your knees. Now, James cracked the door wider, just enough to hear the soft rustle of a towel, the faint splash of water. Then Ricky's voice, mocking, casual. Hey, the monster under the bed's hungry. Disobey, and it'll drag you down, bite your legs off. Got that kid. Emily's voice broke, a faint plea. Please don't. Ricky laughed. Just kidding. Figured you'd be used to it by now. James was down the stairs before the words settled, his steps silent, his hand tight on the railing. He stopped at Emily's door, his voice clear, sharp. Dad's home. Silence fell, heavy and sudden. Ricky scrambled up, muttering, Oh, you're up. Just watching her for Diane. She spilled water, so I told her to clean it. Didn't think she'd freeze up. James didn't answer, just stepped past him, his eyes on Emily, huddled in the corner, a soaked rag in her hands, her pajamas wrinkled, her face pale. He knelt, taking the rag gently, his voice soft. You okay? Sweetheart. She nodded, mechanical, her eyes down. Diane appeared, her smile tight. Didn't know Ricky was up here. He saw her spill and teased her. You know how he is. James stood, his gaze locked on her. Get out. Both you. Diane hesitated, then shrugged, her voice light. Okay, but she's just sensitive. James waited until they left, then sat beside Emily, leaving space so she wouldn't feel trapped. He saw the bare walls, the missing drawings, the torn beer. Something was breaking here, and he'd find it no matter what it took. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hid sharp edges. James Whitmore sat in his bedroom, the door cracked just enough to let sound travel, his eyes fixed on the faint glow of his phone screen. Emily was at press school, safe for now, her stuffed bear clutched tight as he dropped her off. The bruises on her wrist, the fear in her eyes, the way she'd whispered about Diane and Susan, it all churned in his mind, a storm he couldn't outrun. He'd been a soldier, trained to spot threats in the dark, but this was different. This was home, and the enemy was inside. He needed proof, not just for himself, but for Emily, for the truth she couldn't yet name. He moved silently downstairs, the house empty except for the hum of the fridge. Diane was out, Susan at a church meeting, Ricky at whatever dive he crawled to when the day got long. James opened Emily's room, his heart heavy at the bare walls, the absence of her drawings. He found the torn bear at the foot of her bed, its belly split, and inside a folded scrap of paper. A child's scrawl, shaky and uneven, don't tell. His chest tightened, the words a blade. He slipped the paper into his pocket, his resolve hardening. No more waiting, no more watching. He needed evidence, something no one could deny. That night, James drove to a run-down phone repair shop near the bus station, the kind of place with no sign, no cameras, just a flickering yellow light and the hum of an old fan. Marcus, his old Special Forces buddy, was waiting, sleeves rolled up, his face unreadable. Got something for you, Marcus said, laying out 3 items on a scarred table, a charging plug with a hidden mic, a button-sized camera, and a recording chip embedded in a new teddy bear's head. This one's for Emily, he said, a dry smile flickering. Records when she hugs it. Body heat sensor recharges the battery. James nodded, packing the gear into a shockproof pouch. How long will it run? He asked. Long enough, Marcus said. Be careful, Whitmore. You're not just fighting a stepmom, you're fighting a system. Back home, James waited for the house to settle. Diane was in the kitchen, making spaghetti, her laughter forced as she joked with Ricky. Emily sat at the table, silent, her eyes on her plate. James slipped upstairs, claiming a headache, and entered Emily's room. He plugged the charger into a corner socket, checked the signal on his phone app, and placed the new bear beside her pillow, its eyes glinting faintly. 8 minutes. In and out, no trace. He rejoined the family for dinner, forcing a smile, telling an old army story that made Ricky laugh. Diane refilled his glass, her eyes avoiding his. Emily glanced at him, a flicker of something. Hope, maybe, or just trust. At 2 a.m., the house dark, James sat in his room, headphones plugged into his phone. The first audio file downloaded, and he hit play. Footsteps. Then Emily's soft whimper. Diane's voice cut through sharp cold. Spilled the water again, huh? How many damn times do I have to tell you? Useless, just like the whore who gave birth to you. A smack. Not clear if it was a hand or something harder. Emily's breathing, broken, trembling, but no cry, no plea. Then Ricky's voice, a door creaking. This is our little secret, remember. Anyone who tells gets dragged away by the monster. Silence, then the slow click of the door closing. James ripped off the headphones, his heart pounding, his hands shaking with a rage he hadn't felt since the battlefield. He opened the monitoring app. The camera's grainy feed showing Emily's room, shadows moving in the dark, enough to mark the timing but not faces. He called Marcus, his voice low, urgent. I need you to hear this. Can't wait. Marcus listened silent for a long moment, then spoke, firm. It's enough to start, but not to convict. Diane will claim discipline. Ricky will call it teasing. You know how this game's played. James pressed his fingers to his forehead, his voice tight. So what do I do? Marcus's reply was steady. Be patient, precise. If you move now, they'll take Emily and disappear. I've seen it before. Keep recording. James nodded to the empty room, his resolve a blade honed sharp. The next day, he kept the routine. Drove Emily to school, smiled at Diane, ate dinner like nothing was wrong. But his eyes never stopped watching. He installed a second camera under the dining table, another in a fountain pen he carried in his pocket. Every time Ricky entered Emily's room, James noted the time. Every time Diane's voice sharpened, he recorded her tone. The data went to Marcus, encrypted, stored on 2 hard drives, one in a bank safe under Marcus's name. Emily didn't know, didn't need to. She was quieter now, her drawings hidden, her eyes carrying a weight no 5-year-old should bear. But at night, when James read her a story, she leaned closer, her hand brushing his, a small sign she still trusted him. One evening, as James tucked her in, Emily spoke, her voice a whisper. Ricky turned off the light. Said the monster's coming. I was scared. James's heart clenched, but he kept his voice soft. He's wrong, sweetheart. There's no monster. Just me, and I'm here, she nodded, clutching the new bear, its hidden chip recording every word. James kissed her forehead, his mind racing. The evidence was building, but so was the cost. Every day he waited was another day Emily lived in fear. He stepped outside, lighting a cigarette he didn't smoke, watching the smoke curl into the night. The torn photo of Alina, his first wife, was still in his pocket, a reminder of the life he'd failed to protect. He wouldn't fail Emily. Not again. The suburban house felt like a trap now, its clean walls and polished floors hiding a darkness James Whitmore could no longer ignore. He sat in his truck outside, the engine off, the rain from last night leaving faint streaks on the windshield. Emily was inside with Diane, her small hands clutching the new teddy bear, its hidden recorder silently capturing every sound. James's phone buzzed with another encrypted file from the cameras, each one a piece of a puzzle he wished he didn't have to solve. The recordings from the past few days played in his mind. Diane's sharp insults, Ricky's mocking threats, Emily's trembling breaths. Every word was a blade, cutting deeper into the trust he'd once placed in this home. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, knowing he was close to the truth, but hating the cost. Inside, the house moved through its morning routine, but the air was heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Diane was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a rhythm too steady, too controlled. Ricky sprawled on the couch, headphones on, his eyes glued to his phone. Susan sat at the dining table, flipping through a magazine, her smile as practiced as ever. James walked in, his boots soft on the floor, his face a mask of calm. He'd learned to play the part, quiet, unassuming, a tired soldier home from the field. But his eyes missed nothing, the way Diane's hands paused when he entered, the way Ricky's smirk faltered, the way Susan's gaze lingered too long. Emily was at the table, coloring, her bear tucked beside her. James sat across from her, his voice gentle. Morning, sweetheart. Sleep okay, she nodded, her eyes on the paper, a faint tremble in her fingers. Diane glanced over, her knife slicing through a carrot. She's been quiet today, she said, her tone light but edged. Probably just tired. James didn't respond, just watched Emily's crayon move, drawing a house with no windows, no door. His heart clenched, but he kept his voice steady. Want to go to the park later? Emily's eyes flicked up, a spark of something. Hope, maybe. Before she nodded, small but real. That night, James waited until the house was dark, the only sound the faint hum of the fridge. He slipped into his room, headphones on, and opened the latest audio file. Emily's voice, soft, trembling, came first. I'm sorry, stepmom, I didn't mean to drop it. Diane's reply was cold, sharp. You're always sorry, aren't you? Useless girl. If your dad wasn't here, you'd be out on the street where you belong. A pause, then a thud, soft but unmistakable, like a hand on skin. Emily's breath hitched, but she didn't cry. Then Ricky's voice low, mocking. Keep quiet, kid. The monster's always watching. You tell it'll eat you up. The file ended with a door closing, slow and final. James's hands shook, his rage afire he could barely contain. He forwarded the file to Marcus, his message brief, this ends now. He called Marcus at 3 a.m., his voice low, urgent, I've got enough. Diane's hitting her. Ricky's scaring her. I can't wait anymore. Marcus's reply was calm but firm. You've got audio, visuals, but you need to be surgical. One wrong move and they'll lawyer up, take Emily vanish. You've seen it happen. James's jaw tightened, his mind racing. What's the next step? Get Emily out, Marcus said. Somewhere safe. Then we move. I've got a contact at Child Protective Services. They'll need your evidence, but it's solid. James nodded to the dark, his resolve ablaze. Tomorrow, he said. I'm done waiting. The next morning, James drove Emily to Grandma Charlotte's, the elderly neighbor who'd heard the crying at night. He didn't tell Diane, just said he was taking Emily for a drive. Charlotte opened the door, her eyes soft but knowing. She'll be safe here, she said, her hand gentle on Emily's shoulder. James knelt, looking into his daughter's eyes. I've got to take care of something, sweetheart. You stay with Grandma. I'll be back soon. Emily nodded, clutching her bear, her eyes wide but trusting. Don't go away, she whispered. James's throat tightened. Never, he said, kissing her forehead. I promise. Back home, James moved like a ghost, checking the cameras, downloading the latest files. One showed Emily in her room, hiding under the desk, her bear clutched tight as Ricky's shadow passed the door. Another caught Diane in the kitchen, her voice low, venomous. You're nothing but a burden. Your mother's gone, and you're still here, dragging us down. James's hands clenched, his breath ragged. He sent the files to Marcus, then slipped out to meet him at the phone repair shop. Marcus was waiting, a CPS officer beside him, a woman with a no-nonsense gaze. We've got enough to start, she said, reviewing the evidence. Audio, video timestamps. It's damning. But you need to keep them in the house until we move. James nodded, his voice steady. I can do that. That evening, James returned home, his face a mask of calm. Diane was cooking, her smile tight. Ricky was on the couch oblivious. Susan read her magazine, her eyes flicking up as James entered. He sat at the table, forcing a smile, playing the part of the tired father. But his phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from Marcus. Tomorrow, 8 a.m., be ready. James ate dinner, laughed at Ricky's dumb jokes, thanked Diane for the meal. Emily wasn't there, safe at Charlotte's, and that was enough to keep him steady. He went to bed early, the door ajar, listening to the house settle, every creak a reminder of what he was fighting for. At midnight, another file downloaded. Emily's voice, faint from the bear's recorder, recorded before she'd gone to Charlotte's. I don't want to be here, she whispered, alone in her room. Stepmom says I'm bad. Ricky says the monster's coming. I want Daddy. James's heart broke, the sound of her fear a weight he couldn't carry but wouldn't drop. He forwarded it to Marcus, his fingers shaking. The truth was clear now, undeniable, but it came at a cost. Every moment he'd waited, every lie he'd let slide, had been another moment Emily suffered. He lay awake, the torn photo of Alina in his pocket, a reminder of the family he'd lost and the one he'd died to protect. Tomorrow, he'd end this, for Emily, for the truth, for the home they deserved. The suburban street was still under a gray dawn, the air heavy with the promise of rain. James Whitmore stood outside his house, his truck idling, his eyes fixed on the front door. Emily was safe at Grandma Charlotte's, her teddy bear with its hidden recorder tucked in her arms, but the weight of her whispered fears. I want Daddy, pressed against his chest like a stone. The recordings, the grainy footage, the timestamps, they were enough now, Marcus had said. Enough to move, to end this. James had spent the night awake, the sound of Diane's venom and Ricky's taunts looping in his mind, each word a confirmation of the darkness he'd failed to see. Today he'd make it right for Emily, for the home he'd promised her. At exactly 8 a.m., the front gate buzzed, sharp and deliberate. James was already outside, his face unreadable, his hand steady. 3 knocks echoed, measured, official. Diane appeared in the kitchen doorway, her apron still tied, a knife paused mid, sliced through an apple. Ricky lounged on the couch, game controller in hand, oblivious until the door swung open. 2 police officers stood there, uniforms crisp, beside a woman in a Child Protective Services vest, her expression firm but calm. Marcus stood behind them, his badge glinting on a lanyard, his voice steady. Good morning. We have an emergency child welfare check order, statute 42-6. Everyone in the house is required to cooperate. Diane's face paled, the knife clattering to the counter. There's a mistake, she stammered, her smile forced. The CPS officer held up the order, her voice unwavering. We have audio and video evidence of emotional and physical abuse involving a minor in this residence. Ricky bolted upright, his controller falling. I don't know anything, he said, backing toward the kitchen. I'm just staying here. An officer stepped forward, handcuffs ready. Ricky darted for the back door, but a second officer was faster, pinning him to the floor before he could reach it. Diane screamed, "You're insane! She's my child! This is all lies!" James stood silent outside, his eyes on the house, his heart with Emily. The CPS officer entered, her gaze sweeping the room, landing on the bare walls, the too clean space where Emily's life should have been. Susan appeared from the hallway, her coffee cup trembling in her hand, her usual composure cracking. "What's this about?" she asked, her voice thin. The officer didn't answer, just motioned for the police to secure the house. James stepped forward, his voice low, directed at Marcus. "She's at Charlotte's. Safe." Marcus nodded, his eyes sharp but steady. "You did the hard part. Let us handle the rest." Inside, Diane sat on the couch, her hands shaking, her eyes darting between the officers. The CPS officer laid out the evidence. Audio files of Diane's insults, Ricky's threats, video of Emily hiding under her desk, timestamps marking every cruel word. Diane's voice rose, desperate. "I was disciplining her. She's difficult, always breaking things." Ricky laughed, nervous, his hands cuffed. "Just teasing the kid, you know how they are." Susan stayed silent, her face gray, her magazine forgotten. The CPS officer's voice was calm but cutting. "This isn't discipline, this is abuse. Emily's coming with us until we sort this out." James didn't enter, just stood by the door, his eyes on the CPS officer as she stepped outside. "Emily needs to be with someone she trusts," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "She's at Charlotte's. I want her with me." The officer nodded, her expression softening. "We'll get her. You've got a strong case, Mr. Whitmore. We'll need your testimony, but the evidence speaks for itself." James exhaled, the first real breath he'd taken in days. He thought of Emily's drawings, the house with no windows, the "Don't Tell" scrawled in crayon. He'd failed her by leaving, by trusting Diane, but he wouldn't fail her now by noon. The police had Diane and Ricky in custody, Susan detained for questioning. James drove to Charlotte's, his hands tight on the wheel, the torn photo of Alina in his pocket, a reminder of what he'd lost and what he'd fight to keep. Charlotte opened the door, Emily at her side, clutching her bear. "Daddy," she said, her voice small but bright, the first spark he'd heard since he'd come home. He knelt, pulling her into a hug, her small arms wrapping around him, tight, real. "You're safe now," he said, his voice thick. "I promise." She didn't cry, just leaned into him, her bear pressed between them, its recorder silent now, its job done. Back at the house, Marcus met James in the driveway, the CPS officer beside him. "Diane's talking," Marcus said, his voice low. "Blaming Susan, saying she pushed her to be strict. Ricky's claiming it was all a joke, but the recordings don't lie. Susan's the wild card, might turn on them to save herself." James nodded, his eyes on Emily, now sitting in the truck, coloring on a napkin. "What's next?" he asked. "Court," Marcus said. "You've got enough to convict, but it'll be a fight. Diane's got connections through Susan." James's jaw tightened. "Let them fight. I've got Emily." That evening, James sat with Emily on the couch, the house quiet now, the air lighter. He read her a story, her head resting on his arm, her breathing steady. The bear sat beside her, its hidden chip a secret they'd never need to speak of. James thought of the recordings, the way Diane's voice had cut, the way Ricky's laughter had chilled him. He thought of Susan's silence, her enabling, her refusal to see. But most of all, he thought of Emily's small hand in his, the trust she'd given him despite the fear. The fight wasn't over. Court loomed, questions lingered. But for now, Emily was safe, and that was enough to keep him going. The suburban house felt different now, lighter, as if the air itself had exhaled. James Whitmore sat in the living room, the morning sun filtering through new curtains he'd hung with Emily's help. Purple, her favorite color. She was upstairs, her laughter soft but real, a sound James hadn't heard in months, as she played with a puzzle he'd bought her. The teddy bear with its hidden recorder sat on a shelf, no longer needed, a silent witness to the truth that had set her free. The court date was a week away, but the weight of Diane, Ricky, and Susan's actions was already lifting, replaced by something fragile but growing. Trust, rebuilt one quiet moment at a time. James had spent the days since the CPS intervention piecing together a new routine. He woke early, warming Emily's special milk to the exact temperature the doctor recommended, toasting bread just shy of burning, learning the small rituals that made her smile. The fridge was stocked with her favorites now, strawberry yogurt, apple slices, the all-shaped cup he'd found in a box Diane had tucked away. Emily's room was alive again, her drawings taped to the walls, houses with open doors, apple trees, a swing and dotted lines. No more dark corners. No more "Don't Tell" scrawled in crayon. But the letter from Diane, sent from the North County Psychological Recovery Center, sat in James's drawer, unopened since he'd first read it. Her words, "If you could call me mother once, I'd walk the rest of this road trying to earn it," hung heavy, a question he wasn't ready to answer. Emily's therapist, Lorraine, had been clear. "There's no rush," she'd said, her silver hair catching the light in her small office. "A child needs truth in pieces, not all at once. Let her lead." James took it to heart, letting Emily set the pace. One rainy afternoon, she tugged his sleeve as he read her a story, her voice soft but steady. "Daddy, is stepmom coming back?" James paused, the book open on his lap, his heart tight. "No, sweetheart," he said, his voice gentle. "She's somewhere getting help. You don't have to see her again unless you want to." Emily nodded, her eyes on the page, then whispered, "I don't want to." "Not yet." James kissed her forehead, the weight of her choice settling like a promise kept. The court session came on a cold, drizzling morning, the small courtroom sparse but heavy with purpose. Diane sat still, her hair tied back, hands trembling but uncuffed. Ricky fidgeted, unaccustomed to the silence, his usual smirk gone. Susan, once the pillar of control, stared at the floor, her eyes avoiding everyone. James sat in the second row, behind the prosecutor, his face unreadable. Emily was with Charlotte, safe, her therapist's advice echoing, "Keep her away from the courtroom. Let her heal." The prosecutor's voice was steady, reading from the evidence. Audio of Diane's insults, Ricky's threats, video of Emily hiding, photos of her bruises. "This isn't sudden evil," he said. "It's prolonged silence, a chain of neglect and abuse where a child had no voice." The judge's ruling was calm, final. Diane Lambert, 4 years for substantiated abuse, no suspension. Richard Morgan, 18 months for emotional harassment and intimidation. Susan Lambert, 2 years probation, banned from contact with Emily or any minors. Diane's shoulders sagged, tears falling, but she didn't protest. Ricky muttered under his breath, his defiance hollow. Susan said nothing, her silence louder than ever. James exhaled, his hands steady in his lap, the weight of justice settling but not erasing the pain. He thought of Emily's drawings, her small hand in his, the trust she'd given him. This wasn't the end, but it was a start. Back home, Emily's laughter filled the house, a sound that felt like sunlight after a storm. James watched her color, her crayons moving with purpose, a house taking shape, red roof, purple curtains, 2 figures under an apple tree. "Who are they, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice soft. She looked up, a flicker of light in her eyes. "It's home, me and Daddy." James swallowed hard, his smile quiet, his hand resting on her shoulder. The letter from Diane stayed in the drawer, but he didn't need to read it again. Emily's truth was here, in her drawings, in her laughter, in the way she leaned into him without fear. One evening, as rain tapped the windows, Emily taped a new drawing to the fridge. A house with an open door, 2 figures in the yard, an apple tree heavy with fruit. A letter lay on a table, drawn in pale gray, its edges soft. James looked at it, his heart full. If someone went the wrong way but wanted to come back, the door should be open, right? Emily asked, her voice quiet but sure. James nodded, his voice steady. "Some doors need time to be knocked on the right way." She smiled, small but real, and ran to her room, her footsteps light on the wooden floor. "Daddy, don't lock the door. Okay?" "Never," he said, his promise a vow. "The door's always open." The autumn leaves fell slow and red, carpeting the suburban road as James and Emily walked hand in hand from the park, her umbrella swinging, his coat damp from the drizzle. The house glowed warm behind them, its windows bright, its door unlocked, a home rebuilt not from walls but from trust. Diane's letter stayed in the drawer, a question for another day, when Emily was ready to face it. James had failed her once, leaving her in a house that turned dark, but he'd fought to bring her back, not with anger but with evidence, with patience, with love. Emily's drawings told their story now. Houses with open doors, apple trees, 2 figures standing together, no more shadows. They weren't perfect, but they were enough, a father and daughter choosing each other, building a home where fear couldn't live. Under the overcast sky they walked on, the rain soft, the future open, a promise kept in every step they took together.